Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The province announces help to free up ambulances and paramedics to be able to respond quicker to emergency situations. Licensed practical nurses have launched a petition and are speaking out demanding to be recognized as nurses here in Alberta. And there's still time to help children in Ukraine by packing a shoebox with some much-needed supplies. Frank King with Samaritan's Purse will explain.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government announced a new program to help free up ambulances and paramedics to more quickly respond to emergency situations. Alberta Health Services will now arrange for alternative transportation for non-medical patients to make sure that EMS can attend more urgent matters. These new modes of transportation would be in the form of transport vans. Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping reiterated the importance of helping to alleviate the stress off of first responders with this new initiative.
We're seeing a sustained increase of up to 30% in 911 calls, and the system had limited slack in it before. On top of that, emergency departments are seeing high volumes of very sick patients, so paramedics are waiting longer in emergency. There's no EMS system that could deal with this situation without real strain. The fact is, response times are too long, and we need to get them back down. So we're adding capacity, and we're looking at any new option that can help.
Officials from AHS estimate that 15% of transports will be diverted from emergency medical services. Well, the Alberta NDP say they're not impressed with the UCP solution to this new initiative. Health critic David Shepherd says the province's response to the EMS crisis is grossly inadequate and does not address the staffing shortage throughout Alberta's health system.
This response from the UCP, there is nothing new here. There was nothing that required the Premier, the Minister of Health, and their top appointee to AHS. There's nothing new here. The UCP's response to the EMS crisis is grossly inadequate, and it does not address the significant staffing shortage throughout Alberta's healthcare system, including paramedics and emergency room staff. I think it was telling that today there was not a single paramedic, nurse, or any hospital staff that stood with the Premier, the Minister, and the top administrator for AHS.
The government of Alberta also announced that it is increasing the tariff rate for legal aid roster lawyers from $100 to $125 an hour beginning January 1st. Officials say with modernization work on its way to being implemented, the UCP approved a further 25% rate increase to the tariff rate and block billing for legal aid lawyers. Legal Aid Alberta will implement the changes beginning next spring. The tariff rate is how much roster lawyers are paid to do legal aid work. The Alberta Law Foundation, the Government of Alberta, and the federal government all pitch in to fund legal aid. Lethbridge County Council approved having the county move from its current emergency management structure to a new regional program. Officials say Lethbridge County will then be joining Coaldale, Picture Butte, Colehurst, Nobleford, and the Village of Barons. Reeve Tory Campbell in a release says participating in a regional emergency management program will enhance the county's capacity and ability to provide a more comprehensive, coordinated, and effective response to major disasters. Officials say the new regional emergency management program is only intended for large-scale events and will have no impact on the day-to-day provision of emergency services from fire departments, EMS, or RCMP. Funding for the initiative will be split between each municipality and the province. A nursing group is hoping to have their voices heard at the Alberta Legislature. A petition has been started by LPNs for Change, and organizers say that auxiliary care nurses haven't received the same recognition they deserve on the jobs, and the proper name recognition. Currently in Alberta, licensed practical nurses are not formally recognized as nurses in the province. There are over 1,500 signatures signed up so far for the online petition. Jenny Wong, an LPN practicing in High River in Calgary, says it's really frustrating to know that workers are doing more of the grunt work in their jobs without the acknowledgement of being called a nurse.
This is all about the recognition and acknowledgement that we are doing the job of nurses. We are nurses. We are licensed. We are regulated by the College of Licensed Practical Nurses of Alberta. We should be recognized as nurses. That is what our group is about. We're not about the pay. We're not about the union. That is something down the road. Right now, All we care about is that recognition, especially the past 3 years. We have worked as hard as any nurses in the province and in the country, or even in the world. We should be recognized for that.
Provinces such as Ontario, sorry, something in my throat there. Provinces including Ontario, BC, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia currently recognize LPNs as formal nurses. Do you ever have that gut feeling? Many of us don't know this, but there's a huge connection between our guts and our mental health. A University of Lethbridge researcher recently received national recognition for a study on how gut inflammation drives changes in brain structure. So we asked Dr. Chelsea Mattis, what does chronic inflammation actually do to the brain?
When you have chronic inflammation, one of the things that we see is it's highly comorbid with depression and anxiety. And so this almost seems like sickness behaviors in the long term kind of morph into this depression, anxiety. And as a consequence, certain structures in your brain that are involved in assessing threats and how you cope with stress in your life, those parts of the brain become changed.
Dr. Mattis also says gut health can be related to diseases such as Alzheimer's. You won't want to miss this informative interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. A grid alert has been declared due to the continued extreme cold weather here in Alberta. The Alberta Electric System Operator says it was issued because the power system is under stress and it is having to use emergency reserves to meet the high electricity demand. Consumers are asked to reduce their electricity use during alerts to prevent the need for more serious measures, which may include rotating power outages. It's the second grid alert in 2 days here in Alberta. Not only have the prairies been hit hard with snow and cold temperatures, but so has most of British Columbia. Warnings of snow, extreme cold, and Arctic winds have been gripping the province lately. A mass of frigid air settled over the lower mainland following Tuesday's heavy snowfall. Many are quite concerned about the homeless in the region. Officials with the Union Gospel Mission in Vancouver say the weather is a life and death situation for many of their most vulnerable right now who risk hypothermia and frostbite. Additional overnight shelters and warming centres are now open in a number of communities, including Vancouver, Chilliwack, and Victoria. Well, the extreme cold warning continued for our region as well in Lethbridge today. We've been dealing with wind chill values around minus 40 degrees during this winter solstice. It has been very cold. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, we should be receiving a nice gift by Christmas, however, with warmer temperatures.
Yes, Merry Christmas to all of us in southern Alberta, because a warming trend is coming to our region very shortly. Should be here by the holiday weekend, as soon as Friday, actually. And by Christmas Day, Boxing Day, we're already looking at plus temperatures. So that means that by next Tuesday, that mercury is going to climb by about 30 degrees. It's hard to believe because before we get to that, we have to get through that. Minus 28 is the overnight low. It's going to feel more like minus 44 with the wind chill. Into Thursday, minus 28 the high, minus 43 with that wind chill and an overnight low of minus 31. It's going to feel much colder than that. But the good news is that is the end of that, because that warming trend is on its way for the weekend, and I'll be back later in the show to tell you all about it.
Yes, looking forward to that good news and warmer temperatures. Thanks so much, Jeanette. According to officials with the Lethbridge Police Service, property crime at job sites in our city is rising. Now, members of the Building Industry and Land Development Association of Lethbridge, LPS, and other groups sat down recently to discuss the increase in crime at these job sites. Bridget Mearns, the executive director of Build Lethbridge, says she organized the sit-down after hearing concerns from organizations throughout our community.
That sort of formed this round table that we had with the police and some members of our association to talk about what is happening, where is it happening, when is it happening, and what are some of the things that we can do as businesses and as an industry to support each other in reducing the number of crimes or even catching the ones doing the crime.
Mearns says next steps is to reach out to the Build membership and ask them what their concerns are to make sure that crimes are reported. Now here's an update to a story we first brought you on Tuesday. Following an investigation, a fire in the 2400 block of 20th Street North on December 19th was deemed to be accidental. One person was rescued from the house and taken to the Chinook Regional Hospital in critical condition. Heath Wright, the Chief Fire Marshal for Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services, says the cause of the blaze was from an unattended space heater.
This was an accident, and obviously it wasn't done on purpose, but if we can just conscientiously realize that these appliances are not meant for permanent heating, they're there for temporary. So if we can just make sure that when you turn it on, when you're using it, and make sure that you turn it off, if not unplug it when you're finished using it. One of the things that we noticed too, that people like plugging in these appliances into, power bars or extension cords that are 50 feet long. I would not suggest that at all. They pull lots of amperage, these appliances, and therefore I would suggest that we make sure that we plug them directly into an outlet.
Fire officials say the damage from the fire is estimated at $500,000. A trial is taking place for a man who hosted a rodeo event during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ty Northcott held the No More Lockdowns rodeo and rally in May of 2021 in central Alberta. Thousands of people came out for the two-day event. A number of speakers, including Ty Northcott himself, spoke out against government lockdowns and what he called the violation of Canadians' rights and freedoms. Mr. Northcott was charged with violating the public health order. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms is providing legal counsel for the Northcott family. Marty Moore is with the JCCF and joins us now from Calgary. So Marty, what kind of a defense is there for Ty Northcott when he allegedly violated the provincial health order?
But of course, in this country, there is a right to protest. And even if you're rodeoing in protest, that right is engaged under the Charter. So those rights of Ty Northcott are engaged, and there will be further constitutional argument coming on that, actually now with this trial rescheduled to June 20th of 2023.
Now, charges were dropped against Ty's wife, Gail, on October the 13th. Do you think the charges could also be dropped against Ty as well? In fact, could this potentially be precedent-setting when it's all said and done?
I think a precedent does need to be set to show that there's a right to protest, including against the government lockdowns on people's freedoms. And yes, should the constitutional issues be determined, there will be a precedent set. At this point, though, the prosecution of Ty Northcott is continuing here in Alberta. There's a right to peacefully protest in Canada, and this right needs to be defended. And I mean, even in Alberta here, where you think that the right to gather outdoors on the prairies alongside a major highway to have a protest would be protected, it's clear that that right still is in need of legal defense.
Thanks so much for your time today, Marty. That was Marty Moore, lawyer for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining us from Calgary. A Toronto area police chief says the 5 victims of a shooting rampage at a condo high-rise in Vaughan, north of Toronto, were kind-hearted people who were loved by their friends and family. York Regional Police Chief Jim McSween paid tribute to the victims at a news conference.
Rita Camilleri was a smart businesswoman who had a contagious laugh and a zest for life. She was a loving daughter, sister, partner, and the most caring aunt. She loved to travel, cook, and host for her family and friends who she cared for deeply. Vittorio Panza was a very proud Italian immigrant who was a well-respected realtor for over 40 years and had a great passion for music. He was a husband, a father to 3 daughters, and a proud no-no to 7 grandchildren. He was kind-hearted and a gentle individual who loved his family, friends, and foremost, his entire family.
The 73-year-old gunman Francesco Villi was shot dead by police who tracked him to the 3rd floor of the high-rise. As Canada continues to face an ongoing shortage of children's medications, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he does not know if ramping up domestic production of pharmaceuticals is the right approach addressing the problem.
If it is the right thing for Canada to be starting producing these particular pills, or whether it's just a question of getting more reliable supply chains and agreements out there. I mean, if we had a big orange shortage in Canada, people might be shouting, okay, we need to build more greenhouses so we can grow more oranges in Canada. Yes, we would be reliant in terms of oranges. It might not be the best way to spend our money in building greenhouses to grow oranges in Canada, rather than saying, well, can we source them from different places around the world that we'll be sure that we'll get our oranges. It's going to be the same thing with children's Tylenol, children's aspirins, various things. What is the way that we can ensure that there won't be shortages for Canada by having a resilient and diverse supply chain? Maybe that means more production in Canada. Maybe that just means doubling up. But those kinds of reflections around what the best way to make sure parents don't, again, face empty shelves when their kids are at home with a fever.
Reports say around 7 million Ukrainians are now living as refugees. The war in Ukraine has displaced millions of families. The Christian organization Samaritan's Purse is continuing to help those most in need in Ukraine by providing food, water, shelter, and medical care. Samaritan's Purse has also been providing supplies and toys to many kids in need through their Operation Christmas Child campaign. In fact, since 1993, Samaritan's Purse has given out 200 million shoeboxes to children and families in need around the world. Frank King is the News Media Relations Manager with Samaritan's Purse Canada. He joins us now from Calgary to discuss the impact his Christian group is having. Now, Frank, let's talk about how blessed kids and families in Ukraine have been thanks to the work of Samaritan's Purse.
As you know, life has been just miserable for so many people in Ukraine ever since the invasion back in February. Samaritan's Purse has been on the ground there almost since then, providing medical supplies and food distributions and working with partners throughout Europe, actually, who have taken in Ukrainian refugees. We're helping to fund them, or more specifically, our Canadian supporters are helping to fund them through us to make sure that those churches can continue to help folks in need. And as part of that, we want to make sure these children have hope. Some kind of hope that they're not forgotten, that people in Canada, a country they may have never even heard of, have provided these boxes for them through Operation Christmas Child. So while we're doing all the physical work as well, we're also trying to work to provide some hope for the children and for their parents too when they get these shoe boxes full of school supplies, toys, and hygiene items.
Yeah, hope is definitely very important. Now, people are able to pack a shoebox not just during the Christmas season, but throughout the year through Pack-A-Box. Describe how that works and where we can get more information.
Yes, so it's packabox.ca. It's our online shoebox packing program, mechanism, whatever you want to call it. In fact, that's how my wife and I pack our shoeboxes every year. We go to packabox.ca, and it's a little bit like shopping at Amazon. So you pick your gender and your age range. You're presented with a basic box full of items. You can add to that if you want. And then once you've packed all your boxes, you simply check out, you pay your money, and then it's done. The other neat thing about this is when we ask folks to pack shoeboxes just in general, we ask them to include a note and a photo with each shoebox to make sure that these children find out who are these amazing people who did this for me. Well, the neat thing is when you go online at packabox.ca and you pack your shoeboxes online, you can upload a note and a photo for each box you pack. And then when we get volunteers here in our Calgary Processing Center to actually physically pack those online boxes, we download those notes and photos so that the children still get those notes and photos, still find out who are these amazing people who have packed shoeboxes for them.
Thanks so much, Frank. That was Frank King, News Media Relations Manager with Samaritan's Purse Canada, joining us from Calgary. Well, the extreme cold warning for much of southwestern Alberta continued today from Environment Canada. Fortunately, a reprieve is on the way fairly soon. Complete weather details are on deck. It is winter solstice, or the shortest day of the year, but fortunately, the days will be getting a little bit longer and hopefully a little bit warmer as well fairly soon. Jeanette Roche is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, we're known here as being in Chinook country. Will some of those warm Chinook winds be blowing into the Lethbridge fairly soon?
Well, Hal, a warm front is definitely on its way. Whether it's an actual Chinook at this point is hard to say, but we do know that the temperature is going to rise by about 30 degrees by next Tuesday. So look at this variation in temperature. We're going from minus 28 to minus 31 with the low overnight on Thursday evening, up to minus 10 on Friday, climbing Saturday, Christmas Eve, to minus 5. Sunday is Christmas Day, going to be sunny and a beautiful 3 degrees. So there's those plus temperatures. All the way up to 7 degrees on Monday, which is Boxing Day, and then 4 degrees on a Tuesday. So that is just a major climb there. The average high for this time of year, minus 1. We're going to be well above that by Christmas. I thought it's going to be a lovely Christmas gift. Minus 13 is the average low for this time of year. 16 was the high temperature on this day back in 1954, and in 1989 it was minus 38, and that was the lowest on record. Okay. Okay, so 8:26, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this afternoon at 4:33, giving us 8 hours and 7 minutes. So it is winter solstice, giving us the longest night and the shortest day of the year. Okay, so there is an Arctic outflow warning on the west coast, -5 tomorrow in Victoria, -7 in Vancouver, but cold air masses are going to be blowing down there. -23 the high in Edmonton tomorrow and -24 in Calgary. Both of those Alberta cities still sitting at extreme cold. Same thing for the rest of the prairies. Extreme cold warning still in effect for all three of these cities. -22 the high in Saskatoon tomorrow. Regina seeing periods of light snow, -21 the high and -20 the high tomorrow in Winnipeg. Also seeing periods of light snow. Of course, with that wind chill, going to feel so much colder. Okay, in the central part of the country, we're looking at a major winter storm approaching for the holiday weekend. But tomorrow, Toronto's looking at rain mixed with snow, 4 degrees the high, -1 the high in Toronto, and both Montreal and Toronto both seeing periods of light snow tomorrow. But again, a big winter storm approaching. Same thing for the Maritimes. Going to be expecting a big holiday storm this weekend. But tomorrow, sunshine, -2 the high in Fredericton, Halifax rather, 1 degree the high and 0 the high in Charlottetown tomorrow. -2 the expected high tomorrow for St. John's and Newfoundland with a mix of sun and clouds. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Canada's inflation rate dropped slightly to 6.8% in November. Stats Canada says slower price growth for fuel and furniture was offset by rapidly rising shelter costs and stubbornly high grocery prices. In fact, grocery prices climbed at a faster annual rate in November, rising 11.4% from 11% in October. Overall, inflation peaked in July at 8.1%. 20% of all passenger cars, SUVs, and trucks sold in Canada in 2026 will need to be run on electricity. Now, that's according to new legislation being proposed by Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. An initial mandated sales target of 20% will gradually ramp up each year until it hits 60% in the year 2030 and 100% by the year 2035. Manufacturers or importers who do not meet the sales targets could face penalties under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Electric vehicle sales, including fully electric and plug-in hybrids, currently only make up 7.2% of new car registrations in the first 6 months of this year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 264 points on the day to finish at 19,571. The Dow was up 526 points to 33,376. The S&P 500 was up 56 on the day to 3878, and the Nasdaq was up 162 points to 10,709. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 223 to 78.46 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 16 cents to 5.49 U.S. Gold was down 371 to 18.1423 U.S. an ounce, and silver was down 19 cents to 23.97 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.06 per bushel, barley's at $9.58, canola's at $19.35, and corn is at $11.43 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.08 to $156.13. Feeder cattle January contract was up 20 cents to $183.83. And lean hogs February contract was up $4.15 to $88.40. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to $73.48 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government announced a new program to help free up ambulances and paramedics to more quickly respond to emergency situations. Alberta Health Services will now arrange for alternative transportation for non-medical patients to be able to free up EMS to attend more urgent matters. Health Minister Jason Copping says these modes of transportation would be in the form of transport vans. You know, your gut health can also impact your mental health in a big way. A doctor and University of Lethbridge researcher, Dr. Chelsea Mattis, will have details for us shortly in an interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
There is much research that takes place in universities across Canada. The University of Lethbridge is no different. It recently earned national recognition for research on how gut inflammation drives changes in brain structure. Turns out there's a huge connection between our gut and the functioning of our other systems in the body. So today we are speaking with Dr. Chelsea Mattis, who did her postdoc research on the subject. She recently received a L'Oreal Canada for Women in Science Research Excellence Fellowship and one of 3 Royal Society of Canada Alice Wilson Awards. Dr. Mattis, she joins me now. Welcome to Bridge City News. And first of all, congratulations on your work being recognized.
Yes, thank you. It's, science is kind of a slow process. You plant seeds and it's years before you see results. So it's just one of those harvest seasons, it feels like.
How long have you been working on this?
So I've been working on this particular question since about 2017.
Okay.
So
about 5 years.
4 or 5 years.
Okay, so this recognition obviously validates how important the research is and how widespread and debilitating gut inflammation can be for people. So some of us, may not always see that connection between the gut and the brain. So maybe tell us, how does chronic gut inflammation drive changes in brain structure? How does that all work?
Well, we are all familiar with what happens when you get sick. So imagine you have a bout of food poisoning or just some stomach upset, a gastrointestinal bug of some kind. We all know what that feels like. You feel these classic sickness behaviors. You feel fatigue, lethargy. You don't enjoy your hobbies. You kind of just want to, recoil and go in a corner, and maybe you're a little bit more irritable to the people that you live with. But as the inflammation in your gut subsides, so do those sickness behaviors. But if you have chronic gut inflammation, that is a different situation because it becomes something that is your body needs to adapt to. You then still need to go out and get food and take care of your children. And so in some ways, the body is just adapting to this new normal, this chronic gut inflammation. And as a consequence, your brain has different changes to kind of accommodate for that. And this can be driven through immune mechanisms or neural mechanisms or hormonal mechanisms.
Okay, so what is it actually doing to the brain then?
So there's quite a number of things happening when you have chronic inflammation. One of the things that we see is it's highly comorbid with depression and anxiety. And so almost seems like sickness behaviors in the long term kind of morph into this depression, anxiety. And as a consequence, certain structures in your brain that are involved in assessing threats and how you cope with stress in your life, those parts of the brain become changed. And this is what we see, people that have chronic gut issues, or really any kind of chronic inflammation disease, what they will find is that, maybe they'll be in a period of remission where things seem to be okay, but then something will happen in their life, like a bad breakup, or perhaps, they lost their job, or a pet dies. Those stresses are enough to actually drive a flare, a remission, or a flare up of disease again. And so in this way, it changes the way your brain structure is, but also then how you perceive and respond to things in the environment. And that can also have then impacts on the disease itself.
Oh, that's fascinating. So can the condition of one's mind be based on how healthy their gut is? Is it kind of like symbiotic like that almost?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. People are always wondering, well, what can I do to kind of improve, the situation I have? So we have, there's medicines that people take that affect their gut inflammation, but also brain inflammation. And so those are often antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicines. But other things like cognitive behavioral therapy can be a way that people can sort of change the way that you perceive the environment to kind of help reduce amounts of stress. Other things like anything that can activate this beautiful nerve called the vagus nerve, can actually drive this anti-inflammatory pathway. And you can activate this through meditation, through deep breathing exercises, through yoga, singing. So there's lots of kind of different ways that you can sort of control from more of a top-down way to kind of help manage.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't sound like modern medicine at all. It almost sounds like a jump in philosophy from Western medicine to Eastern medicine. Do you see it that way at all?
Certainly, there's a lot of value to the kinds of medicine that are practiced, not traditional medicine. Of course, I would always say that the most important thing is to see a professional doctor to manage the symptoms of disease, because that's really important. But I think increasingly people are recognizing that, the anxiety and the depression that is comorbid with lots of chronic diseases, it's not because you have the disease. You're not anxious and depressed because you have the disease. That's part of it. But it's also a very important component of the disease. The disease also involves these sort of behavioral changes to kind of adapt to this new normal. And in many ways, then treating the way that the anxiety and depression is an important component of treating the disease holistically. So certainly, like we all know, diet and exercise and good sleep, these are really important things to help, with brain and body to help good function. But then there's these other little things that can be really helpful too, that maybe are more overlooked. But certainly, I wouldn't say that singing is a good thing to do instead of taking medicine.
Yeah, I can see how it would make you feel better though, especially if you're a good singer. Even if you're a bad singer, right? we all like to sing in the shower. So does this also mean that maybe gut health could affect other brain functions like learning or memory or other things like that?
Yes, no, absolutely. People that have chronic gut inflammation will often experience not only anxiety and depression, but also cognitive dysfunction. So this is kind of like working memory or focusing on certain things, attention. So people that have chronic illnesses often will attend to the things that they experience. So, for example, they might attend more to things related to gut health or things that remind them of pain or the anticipation of pain. So they might attend more to that. And so it does become kind of a bit of a reworking in that sense too. But certainly cognitive dysfunction, then this sort of brain fog that we hear about in terms of long COVID, it's a very real thing, and it's a part of the disease, of the immune response.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. Could there also be a connection between gut health and, let's say, Alzheimer's disease, or is that completely different?
No, absolutely not. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that gut health impacts brain health and mental health in many different kind of disease states. So, for example, people that have Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or dementia, studies have looked at the communities of microbiota in their gut. So these are the bacteria, the fungi, the viruses that live in your gut all the time. But people that have chronic diseases, including Alzheimer's, they will notice the community of their gut will actually be shifted. It'll be less diverse. It might have certain sort of bugs in it that aren't really associated with healthy outcomes. And so we do see that it all is connected. The things that are in your gut, they can secrete things that directly act on neurons that go into the bloodstream and directly impact and are able to access the brain. And so we do know that, the microbiome is sort of like this living organ inside of us, producing things, responding to stress and diet and sleep. And so this also, is a huge part of sort of the holistic, look at a particular disease.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because that term gut health it's so thrown away. It's thrown around these days. It's kind of almost like a catchphrase. But when you get right down to the basics of what does it actually mean by having good gut health? Like we hear about the bad bacteria and whatnot. So, does it really just come down to a person's diet?
So this is a great question. And this is a question that researchers are asking, like, what is a healthy gut microbiome? And it's different for different people. A lot of it is genetic and sort of based on sort of what is around you. Was it a vaginal birth? Was it a cesarean section? What kind of foods were you exposed to as a child? Did you have a pet in the house? Are you an only child or do you have a huge family? These things all make a difference. But of course, also the things that you eat and how you're exposed to things in your environment, that all makes a big difference as well. But what we do know is that there seems to be a core microbiome for people that once they sort of have reached a certain age, like maybe 3 or 4, it kind of stabilizes to some extent, but it does still shift. And we know that a healthy microbiome seems to be associated with increased diversity. So people that have good health in older age will have a more diverse microbiome than people that may be suffering from different kinds of diseases, whether it's Alzheimer's or ulcerative colitis or diabetes. And so a diverse microbiome seems to be associated with health. And the best way to get a diverse microbiome is to eat a diverse diet, rich in different things. In particular, things that are like probiotics, like that have bacteria in them, like yogurts, things like that are fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut or kombucha, and then just lots and lots of fiber. Because plant fibers are very important because they don't get digested in your small intestine, so they go to your large intestine or your colon, and suddenly all those really important gut bacteria have food to eat. So if you're not eating a diet rich in fibers, then you're kind of starving out really important players in your gut microbiome that are important for your health.
Wow, that is fascinating. So if somebody has chronic inflammation in the gut, what would you advise them to do? Is it mostly diet related, or could there be some other underlying problem there?
Well, I would always recommend, of course, people talk to their physicians and also get a referral to a specialist if you're dealing with gut specific problems. But I would also say it's important to, start looking at the diet, starting a diet journal and getting a sense of, are there certain foods that might trigger discomfort? People frequently find that lactose or gluten, suddenly they have, sensitivities to that they weren't aware of before. But also, yes, I would say, a healthy diet is going to help anything. So, again, like a diet that's really rich in diversity, if you can try and incorporate fermented foods and lots of fibers and probiotics. So, I mean, it's an important component of health, but it's also important to start maybe paying a bit more attention to what's going in as well. So, that food diary, I think, is something that most physicians would sort of recommend people with struggle.
Yeah, I understand that your work has therapeutic potential as well. So what are you finding that may help remediate chronic inflammation-induced changes in the brain?
So we're looking at a number of different things. My research program is kind of looking more from like top down. We're not looking at attenuating or suppressing gut inflammation, but rather we're looking at, okay, what's happening in the brain? And if we change things in the brain, might that change things in the gut too? And one of the things that we're looking at is psilocybin. And so this is a really exciting drug because it has been shown to have really, potential for people that have drug-resistant depression. And so people that have, chronic gut illnesses and have this comorbid anxiety and depression, a different kind of drug might be really helpful for them. So we're looking at psilocybin, and I'm also looking at how certain cannabinoids might be helpful as well, like CBD. There's a whole bunch of other ones, CBG, CBDV. And so we're looking at sort of, non-traditional kinds of medicines to see how that might impact the brain.
So it's still in the research phase now, or should people be running to the cannabis store to pick up these CBDs?
So I work with mice. I work with mouse models, and we're really good at curing diseases in mice. Of course, translating that to people is a little bit more difficult, but we're looking at the mechanisms to understand how these things might be helpful and how different groups of people that have diseases might be helped by certain things more than others. So there's a whole, subpopulations within a group of sick people that might find treatments that work for them that might not work for other people. But I would say, people are finding success with certain kinds of cannabinoids in attenuating certain kinds of pain, or I'd say it's more related to pain than it is to inflammation. But it's a very case by case basis, and I would be hesitant to recommend anyone do anything without the advice of their doctor.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Do you think that as a result of your research that there could be other methods to treat mental health issues in the future? Where could this lead?
Absolutely. I think that by understanding how chronic inflammation changes the brain, because one of the problems is when you have chronic diseases and then you're in a period of remission and you're trying to stay in that remission, well, your brain structure has been changed fundamentally in certain ways. And then how can you kind of revert that back to, something that will improve your quality of life? Sure, it might be adaptive to have those changes in the brain, but evolution always doesn't really care about your quality of life. We want people to be happy and have healthy lives. And so some of these drugs that we're looking at are maybe more targeting sort of inflammation-induced anxiety and depression, which is a different kind of depression than someone who maybe is a certain genetic predisposition to these sorts of things, or maybe experienced, trauma in early life that would lead to sort of depression and anxiety. So we're looking at a kind of a different perspective, like a different type of anxiety and depression in people. But I think that looking at the different kinds of drugs that might be available, and not necessarily the anti-inflammatory drugs that were traditionally looked at for, suppressing inflammation in the brain. I think by looking at some of these drugs that have been traditionally maligned and pushed aside as sort of psychedelics, and they're recreational and there's no value to them medicinally, I think increasingly researchers are understanding that's not the case. We really need access to these drugs so we can test them and try them and help people.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating stuff. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but Dr. Chelsea Mattis, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate having you on. And once again, congratulations on being recognized nationally. That's a huge feat for you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Chelsea Mattis is a researcher at the University of Lethbridge who was recently recognized nationally for her findings on the gut-brain health connection. Well, the holidays are almost here, and they can, of course, bring us so much joy. But as family gathers to celebrate together, it can also bring some relational tensions, some arguments, past and present pain, et cetera, et cetera. So is there a way to avoid these situations? And if not, how can we keep things peaceful during the holidays? Joining us to discuss this is Abe Block. He is a retired Lethbridge pastor. Abe, welcome once again to Bridge City News. So great to see you again.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be on again.
Awesome. Okay, so Christmas, it's the most wonderful time of the year, of course, but except, of course, when it isn't, right? So I'm guessing probably one of the most common issues that family will run into this holiday season is, oh my gosh, among other things, we got politics, particularly all the changes in the Alberta government. So Smith versus Notley, we've got Danielle Smith's Sovereignty Act. Should there be an Alberta police force? Not to mention what feels like that old argument by now, COVID, the differing views on vaccines and masks and what have you. But a bottom line here is, how can a family avoid letting all of this turn into World War III?
Well, it's interesting that relationships are so incredibly important. And I know for myself, I love politics. I love sitting and chatting with people. And I keep reminding them, look, we don't have to agree. It's just fun to talk about it. But not everybody feels that way. And so I think what happened during COVID, if COVID did one thing, it absolutely divided people. It divided families. It created difficulties. It was unreal how strongly people felt about their opinion on both sides, I might add. And so for me, I enjoyed discussing it with people. But the other thing that COVID created a problem for us was there was a lot of confusion. We weren't sure of who to believe. We weren't sure of what to believe. I think there was a lot of confusion, and that created a problem for people. And basically, we're not very good at dealing with confusion.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. We like to live black and white, but not everything is black and white.
Yeah, it's so not a black and white world that we're living in.
No, there's a lot of gray stuff. And so I think it behooves us, especially if I might add, it behooves us as believers to be gracious, to be kind, to be understanding. My question always is, in all of these things, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus say? And there were times when he was very opinionated, extremely opinionated. There were times when he was so kind. and so gentle and so gracious. And I think for myself, I try and operate that way. And I try and encourage people, if they feel very strongly, I simply say, can we agree to disagree on this one and still keep our friendship? One of the things we often do when we disagree is we put up a wall. If you disagree with me, I don't know if I can talk to you again, etc. We can't be friends again. And that's unfortunate. So I think for a Christian, it's his responsibility to be gracious like Jesus was, but not to let everything ride either, because then the other person feels, okay, I can keep doing this, which isn't good either. They also need to learn a gracious spirit.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it's a good idea to maybe set those boundaries in place ahead of time, maybe over those kinds of things. And for example, say if the other relatives don't agree with you on a certain debate, just say, hey, we're family. Let's agree to avoid this topic altogether during your visit. Is that maybe an idea as well?
Well, to me, I think if you have this uncle, for example, who's always has to be right and he comes to the meeting, to the family, my suggestion would be whoever the host is needs to meet with that uncle ahead of time. Try and arrange so that here are the parameters that we want to run this time. We want to have a good time. We want to celebrate. We want to have fun. But we don't want to get into issues that are you don't want to get into issues that are going to be a major problem for us.
Mm-hmm. No.
And so somehow I think if we can set that up ahead of time, that's better.
Yeah, that's some wisdom there. And I guess if Uncle decides that he doesn't want to take part, then that would be his choice, right? Or not come altogether.
I know for a fact that has happened, that the uncle then says, well, then I'm not coming. And I say, well, that's your decision. But these are the parameters because it's at our place, you see, especially if it's at our place. Yeah. If it's at his place, you're bound a little bit if it's at his place because he's going to do what he's going to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's so sad when Christmas is such a happy time and then you get all these people together with all these conflicting viewpoints, and it's such a common story that you hear of people almost dreading getting together with extended family. But people also say that we should avoid talking about religion during family visits. So Abe, you're a pastor, so what's your take on this? Are you seeing it as an opportunity to share the gospel, or is there a way to do so with unbelieving family members in a way that doesn't cause division?
Well, I guess my question again is, what would Jesus do? I try and emulate, if at all possible, what he would do in a situation like this. And his idea was, for example, when Mary came, he was invited to a Pharisee's house, and Mary came and she poured ointment on his feet and then wiped them off with her hair and stuff like that. And the host complained about that. So what did Jesus do? He just didn't let him complain. He stopped them up and he said, you know, when I came in, you didn't even wash my feet. You didn't do any of those welcoming things that the Jews are supposed to do. She has constantly been doing what you failed to do. And he drew the attention of what he should have been doing. He drew that to his attention. He didn't just let it go. So I think a sensitivity to the Holy Spirit at a time like that. But how did he do it? He did it straightforward, but in love and understanding and patience. And I think for us, that's the hard part. And I think often there are times when we just let it slip because it's not a major enough issue and it just goes off the table. But there are times, I think, when people need to be challenged so that they don't feel they can do this anywhere. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's important. And Jesus said at one point in time, I'll give you the words. We need to be sensitive to that and listen to what he's telling us in any particular situation.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess the same would be true. I mean, we were talking about the contentious uncle that everyone seems to have, but sometimes there's family discussions with differing views, but one or more individuals might have this need to be right every single time. So any thoughts on how to deal with that?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too on how relationships are. I come from a family of people that are opinionated and can be quite assertive. And so when my siblings and I get together, there's a lot of talk and sometimes it gets loud. But there's also an understanding that by the time the discussion is over, we all hug each other because that's crucial and that needs to remain, even though we all have opinions. And I think that's important for us to treat others that way.
Oh, absolutely. Of course. Some families might have arguments over how much time grandparents are getting to see with their grandchildren over the holidays. So you might, they might say something like you spend more time with the in-laws or the other side of the family. That comes up every so often. So how should something like that be handled?
Well, I'll tell you what, in my past, I've had to live with that because my father was also a pastor in the same community, the same church that my wife had attended in the past. So they lived on one corner, and my wife's parents lived within eyesight of that corner. And we would go once a month, always to visit over there. Well, one of the grandmas was looking out the window when she expected us to come, and we'd go to my parents, and then she'd look at the time. And then she'd be wanting the same amount of time as what we were giving to my parents.
Aww.
Well, for us, that was a bit of a challenge, but we were very conscious of it. And in order to help both of our parents, we decided we would watch the time very closely. That's something we could do without creating a problem. And so we simply did that. And I think in my marriage counseling, for example, I've often had the couples, when we talk about parent and child relationships in marriage, they would often say, well, we're not marrying the families. The problem is, I would say, yes, you are.
Right.
Because this is the kind of stuff that happens. You need to be very conscious. So my suggestion to them was this. When you're with them, and I guess this is another question that might come up, how do you deal with the training of your grandchildren when you disagree?
Right. Yes, I was going to ask you that because you have several grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. So yeah,
exactly.
If your adult kids are raising your grandkids differently, should you let them know? Or what should you do?
I used to say to the couple at a time like that when we talked about this, I would say, listen very graciously to whatever they say and do not argue. Then go back home and do your own thing. Because that's very important. But because you listened, it's amazing how the parents will feel like you're doing what they want. Just because you listen. And I think it behooves us, for example, we have kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. That has changed our perspective like crazy. And we have decided, we did our training. And if we train properly, we can trust our kids to also train properly. And the other thing we can do, we can always pray for them because we don't know the circumstances that they're always in. We don't know some of the struggles that they come out of day to day because they don't share everything with us. Mm-hmm. And so we need to give them that freedom. Right. Okay, these are your kids. You've been trained well, but if you're going to change, and every once in a while, I think back to my life, how I changed when I left home and got married. I'm sure my parents often thought, hey, what are you doing? How are you training your children? Good grief, we never did that. No, you didn't, because it's a different world.
Absolutely. Abe, the time is ticking by so quickly here, but I want to get to this one question, and it's completely changing gears a little bit. So some of us are guilty of this, trying to make the holidays as perfect as possible. So I know women especially have this picture perfect Christmas in their head. Maybe they're trying to recreate what their mom or grandma did and keep up with those perfect Christmas traditions with decorating, cooking, baking, everything, right? So any advice to the host who perhaps tries to do too much and ends up getting all stressed out, tired, and cranky as a result? I know I'm guilty of this myself.
Well, it's a good question. I don't know if I can help anybody with that, because that's a very personal thing. But I remember I had a sister-in-law who was phenomenal at setting the table and making everything just perfect. The challenge was they would invite people over a lot, but they wouldn't get invited back. And the reason was the people thought she had set such a perfect table and they couldn't do it. And so they were afraid. They were good friends, but they were afraid to invite them back. So that's the flip side. You see, she never got tired of it. So that wasn't a hardship for her. But I think, especially the women, they need to decide what they're comfortable with and not compare themselves to others. It's generally a comparison thing. That's generally what it is. I can't do it good enough, and I'm trying to make it perfect, but that's not my cup of tea.
Yeah. Or I'm
And
trying to do what mom did all those years. Yeah.
That's exactly what happens. And my only suggestion is that's something you need to deal with personally. You need to come to grips with what can I do and still be relaxed about it all, and yet enjoy the company. To me, that's one of the most important things. Do what you can, but enjoy the company. I mean, we have the story in the Bible. You have Mary and Martha. What happened? Well, one of them went and did all the preparation. The other ones listened to Jesus and enjoyed the fellowship. And what did Jesus say? You need to leave that preparation over there. You need to come and spend some time with me. And I guess that would probably be the biggest suggestion that I would make. There's a good picture right there.
That's perfect. Absolutely. Great comparison there. Thank you so much, Abe. It looks like we're out of time, but we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, and God bless you. Merry Christmas. Have a good one, and stop comparing and enjoy the company.
All right. Merry Christmas to you, Pastor Abe. Abe Block is a retired Lethbridge pastor. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching, and Merry Christmas.